Thanks to Dysautonomia Support Network for inviting me today. I'll be talking about the intersection of dysautonomia and nutrition, what we know or what we think we know so far, and some thinking about how to hopefully use nutrition to feel better when you have dysautonomia. I'm Jill Brook, a longtime nutritionist in California, nutrition consultant to Dysautonomia Clinic. I'm on their research team as well, and I myself have POTS. This is me doing acro yoga because I don't do so well upright for very long. So that's me. I've got 30 minutes, so my plan today is to first humbly acknowledge that nutrition research does not have the best track record for getting things right the first time around. You know this if you were conflicted about whether to eat your eggs this morning. In dysautonomia, we only have a few small studies to go on, and they're pretty much all on POTS patients and no other forms of dysautonomia. So we should probably think of this as still very early thinking about dysautonomia nutrition. Next, I'll do a whirlwind tour of nutrition research findings as they relate to dysautonomia, which is to say POTS, because that's what all the studies are on. And then I'll talk about some other nutrition strategies we might consider because while the research was not done on dysautonomia patients, the findings might still apply to us. And in the only 30 minutes, we'll just barely scratch the surface because dysautonomia is so complex. This shows POTS symptoms that are reported in a majority of patients. Their prevalence of each symptom is in the parentheses. So you see nausea and vomiting was reported by 82% of patients, abdominal pain in 70%, lightheadedness just even sitting was in 64%. So we're not off to a good start for most patients to even be able to enjoy a meal. Other symptoms like dizziness, fatigue, headache make it hard for patients to go grocery shopping or to cook or to clean up. And many of these symptoms famously get worse after eating. So nutrition can be a challenge even before you add in common comorbidities. This list is from an article on nutritional implications of POTS from the Mayo Clinic. It's the GI and non-GI conditions that their POTS patients had. And it's not important to understand every single condition. The sheer number of them is the point. And this fits with what I see also, which is that it's almost never just dysautonomia. The comorbidities that I'm seeing the most affect nutrition are autoimmune conditions, and there's over 100 different ones, some that affect diet more than others. Mast cell activation syndrome, which can cause all kinds of issues with eating and digesting, and it can cause allergic type reactions to foods. Joint hypermobility syndrome or hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which can cause a lot of joint pain, fatigue, GI issues, and other problems. Gastroparesis, which is when the stomach doesn't work properly, making it difficult and sometimes painful to eat very much. Irritable bowel syndrome or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, which can cause all kinds of different digestive discomfort, bloating, stomach aches, diarrhea, gas, constipation. Sometimes these patients feel healthier, actually, the less healthy they eat. For example, eating a lot of vegetables can make them feel worse. Rapid gastric emptying or dumping syndrome means that the GI tract moves food through too quickly, often making patients afraid to leave the home after eating for fear that something embarrassing might happen. Chronic fatigue syndrome can also affect many aspects of eating, including just making it impossible sometimes to even just go grocery shopping or to cook. I've had quite a few patients who had both dysautonomia and chronic fatigue syndrome, and they just couldn't even walk from their bedroom to the kitchen very often, so they needed to keep foods on their bedstand. So between multiple symptoms of dysautonomia and multiple common comorbidities, I don't think I'm exaggerating to say that POTS patients or dysautonomia patients can have a combinatorial explosion of complexity. This is just one example of what a patient might have going on with the symptoms surrounding the POTS, with the comorbid conditions surrounding that. This is just an example, and granted, it's of a very complex patient, but we do see people like this. But the good news is that more issues means more opportunities to potentially help, in my opinion. to help somewhere, somehow, somewhere along the line. Because dysautonomia research has some nice nutrition strategies to offer, but not that many. We'll cover them quickly, and you might be wondering, well, is that all? But the good news is that every other circle on this diagram, which represents either a common symptom or comorbidity, also has their own sets of nutrition findings or nutrition strategies around it. Now, granted, it won't have been tested on dysautonomia patients, but often it will have been tested with, a bigger, better body of research than what we have around dysautonomia, often replicated in a lot of different populations, so we can hope to find something that applies to us too. For example, the diets for autoimmunity and MCAS may be particular opportunities, since some experts think that some cases of POTS or dysautonomia can be actually caused by autoimmunity or MCAS. And to be clear, I'm not saying nutrition can cure any of these issues, but I think that it may be able to move the needle on quite a few of them. So let's start with findings from studies actually done on dysautonomia patients. Well, which is to say POTS patients. The strongest studies have to do with low blood volume. We know the average adult has about 5 liters of blood total. Studies have found that approximately 70% of POTS patients were hypovolemic, meaning they had low blood volume. In a study of 13 POTS patients, the mean deficit in blood volume was 12.5%, or about a third of a liter of blood. The range was pretty large, ranging from 0 deficit to 27%. And even though a third of a liter short on blood might not sound like much, the papers by Dr. Raj and colleagues said that this does represent a moderate to severe hypovolemia. It's thought to contribute to many POTS symptoms, especially when upright. And the reason is thought to be that the kidneys are flushing out too much salt, and then the fluids always follow the salt. So the strategy for dealing with this is thought to be consuming extra salt and fluids. The 2019 expert consensus statement agreed that the solution was to gradually work toward 2 to 3 liters of water per day and up to 8 to 10 grams of salt per day. Some experts also recommend drinking up to half the fluids from electrolyte drinks if the POTS is really severe. All fluids are hydrating except for alcohol, which can be a triple whammy to dysautonomia patients because it's a diuretic, a vasodilator, and can also be a mast cell trigger. Patients have to test their own reaction to things like caffeine. Some like it for the energy and vasoconstriction. Some feel too jittery. Same with dairy. Some find that it's very hydrating. Some have bad reactions to it. Front-loading the drinks makes sense to avoid nighttime bathroom trips. And the sports nutrition literature suggests that chugging the first 2 cups of fluids can help promote a faster boost to blood volume. Lots of patients like doing this even before they get out of bed in the morning. 8 to 10 grams of salt is about 2 teaspoons or 4,000 milligrams of sodium. And it's not that outrageously much for patients who can still eat normally, given that the average US consumer is eating 3,200 milligrams of sodium per day. And Dr. Satish Raj's labs have done 2 great studies on this. In the most recent, they had 14 POTS patients and 13 healthy controls come into a residential eating facility twice for 1 week each time, about a month apart. All their food was provided to them, and on one of those weeks, they ate an almost 0 sodium diet, and on the other, they ate a very high sodium diet at 17 grams of salt per day. In POTS patients, the high dietary sodium intake did increase blood volume. It got about halfway back to normal on average. The higher salt intake lowered standing plasma norepinephrine, that's the fight or flight, the hyperadrenergic state, and it also decreased standing heart rate. So it did help the POTS quite a bit, but it did not get them all the way back to normal. But remember, this was going from almost 0 salt in the diet to 17 grams a day, whereas the average POTS patient would be going from their baseline, which might be like 5 or 6 grams a day, up to a maximum of about 10 grams. So we don't expect miracles, but quite a few patients seem to think this helps them. A few notes about electrolyte drinks. You might want to avoid artificial sweeteners, especially aspartame and sucralose. That's NutraSweet and Splenda, because they're bad for gut microbial health, mood, and maybe even cancer risk. Propel is a common drink with artificial sweeteners. I think that one has NutraSweet. If someone is having mast cell reactions to all kinds of electrolyte drinks, one likely culprit might be the citric acid. It turns out that 80% of the world's citric acid is made by mutant strains of toxic black mold, no exaggeration. And if there's a bit of contamination from that toxic black mold that gets into the drink, it's documented that it can cause pretty bad inflammatory or allergic type reactions. So you might just look for one that does not have any citric acid in it. Food colorings have also been shown to exacerbate ADHD in some people, so homemade recipes can be found online, and it is nice to save the money and avoid the artificial ingredients. It's also nice to avoid the plastic containers. If you get the powdered drinks and mix them yourself, then you can avoid drinking BPA, that's bisphenol A, or other bisphenols, which are unhealthy for a lot of reasons, but a big one for POTS patients is autoimmunity. Dr. Blichstein's 2016 paper showed that POTS patients are at higher risk already for autoimmunity, and this paper at the bottom by Dr. Datis Karazian showed that multiple different mechanisms, like 12 different mechanisms by which BPA in plastics may promote autoimmunity. So once you're hydrated, the next challenge, often, at least in POTS, can be excessive blood pooling in the abdominal area or the splanchnic area, which is made even worse by eating. So now you may have not enough blood to start with, and then what you do have may be pooling in your abdomen instead of circulating up to your head and heart. So this is thought to be why so many patients have POTS exacerbated by meals. And studies show that everyone's heart rate goes up after meals. It's just that most people don't notice it as much as POTSies. A full-size meal is thought to triple blood flow to the GI organs. Carbohydrates do it more than proteins or fats. So the solution proposed is to try smaller, lower carbohydrate meals. Some patients also like to lie down for 30 minutes after meals. Waist-high compression stockings might theoretically help. And I personally like to lay on my stomach while I eat because you can't get as much blood pooling that way. The next issue we'll talk about is glucose intolerance. After ingesting carbohydrates, a normal body raises insulin to escort that glucose into the muscle cells, where it can be either burned or stored. Insulin resistance is when cells don't respond to the insulin and don't let in the glucose. So the reaction of the body is that the pancreas will at first put out extra insulin to overcome that resistance. But over time, if this progresses, then the blood sugar may not be able to enter the cells. So that drives up insulin and blood sugar and sets the stage for type 2 diabetes. High insulin is associated with more inflammation and fatigue. So sometimes people who get very fatigued after a carby meal, it might be the insulin, and going lower carb may help. Now, usually we see glucose intolerance in people who are overweight. It's extremely common in the Western world, but typically it's in older people. Unfortunately, when Dr. Schibao's lab at Vanderbilt did a glucose challenge test in POTS patients, she found that their insulin was twice as high as controls who were matched for age, gender, and size. In other words, lean POTS patients had the insulin response of obese people. So that's another reason to reduce carbs. And maybe POTSies should consider showing this study to their doctors so that they might start watching for insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes at a younger age or a lower BMI than would normally be typical. The next issue that has a little bit of research is gluten intolerance. In one study, 100 POTS patients were tested for celiac disease and compared to the general population. 4% of POTS patients had celiac disease versus a background rate of only 1%, so they had 4x celiac. When it came to self-reported gluten sensitivity, 42% of POTS patients had it versus only 19% among age and sex-matched controls, so over twice as many. The authors said that they did the study because their POTS patients kept telling them how much better they felt on a gluten-free diet. And we were hearing the exact same thing at the Dysautonomia Clinic, so we did a survey of 20 POTS patients who had, on their own, already gone gluten-free for at least 4 weeks. And we just wanted to know, okay, you keep telling us how much better you feel off of gluten, but how exactly do you feel better? Which symptoms improve and how much? So we gave them the Compass 31 survey of autonomic symptoms, which asks about orthostatic intolerance, vasomotor symptoms, GI symptoms, pupilomotor symptoms, secretomotor symptoms, and bladder symptoms. They took the survey once for how they felt back when they used to eat gluten, and they took it again for how they felt after going gluten-free, all from memory. And we were pretty impressed with the responses. These are the 20 subjects' total Compass 31 scores before and after going gluten-free, with the mean score on the far right. And you'll see that every single patient except one had improvement in their autonomic symptoms. Some improved a lot, as you can see. Patient number 13 is the only one who must have stayed gluten-free for other reasons because their autonomic symptoms didn't change, but everyone else did have some level of improvement in autonomics. And then when we look at those autonomic symptom subcategories, you see statistically significant improvement in orthostatic intolerance, vasomotor symptoms, GI symptoms, and then of course the total score. On top of that, the mean self-reported improvement in POTS symptoms was 45%. Let me say that again. The mean self-reported improvement in POTS symptoms was 45%. That blew us away. Granted, this was not a random sample of POTS patients. These were POTS patients who had, on their own, decided to go gluten-free. But we were still amazed at that effect size because it was so big. So why would a gluten-free diet help theoretically? We don't know, but gluten is known to increase intestinal permeability, which can be a big driver of inflammation and autoimmunity because it means that more of whatever is in your intestines finds its way into your bloodstream. Studies also show that antibodies to gluten cross-react with some brain tissues. Interestingly, some studies have shown that only 1/3 of gluten symptoms are GI symptoms, and the other 2/3 are actually neurological. Now, unfortunately, a low gluten diet does not really do anything. This is one diet where you really need to do it almost 100% to see results. And it takes some vigilance because, for example, an independent lab found that 50% of the menu items at restaurants claiming to be gluten-free actually were not gluten-free. There's also some findings that some people are genetically predisposed to something called a gluteomorphin reaction. That's when your brain has literally been making opioids from gluten. So you can have a real honest to goodness opioid withdrawal when you give up gluten. And I suspect that accounts for some of the people who swear that they absolutely need gluten to feel good. But for people with constipation or slow gut motility or things generally associated with opioids, getting off gluten can sometimes help. They just have to ride out a week or two of withdrawal symptoms. Easier said than done, right? Gluten is not the only trigger in wheat. We're saying gluten, but really if you're reacting to wheat and wheat products, you could be reacting to some other things that we don't have time to talk about. And then finally, the United States famously has the most triggering wheat. Some people, if they don't have celiac disease, if they just only have a gluten sensitivity, can enjoy wheat from places like Italy or Japan where it's grown differently. So when people really care about their wheat, sometimes they will choose to import it from another country. Okay, moving on to gut health. This is a huge new area of interest because so many different chronic conditions have been associated with either gut dysbiosis, which is a bad balance of friendly and unfriendly gut microbes, or just diminished gut microbial diversity. A team at Vanderbilt looked at the diets and the gut microbes of 23 POTS patients and 24 matched controls and determined, while that there were some minor differences in microbial strains on average, they didn't see any super major differences, and they didn't see reductions in short-chain fatty acids, which would indicate a lack of friendly microbes. So interestingly, what they did find when they looked at food journals was that the POTS patients were not eating more salt or more fiber like they had been instructed to. So the patients were a little busted there. But we know that diet is huge for driving microbiome health and diversity in general. And so it's great, in my opinion, that they did not find that POTS patients had anything disastrously wrong with their gut health. Not obviously worse than the matched controls anyways. So moving on to potential nutrient deficiencies in POTS. This study looked at 24 adolescents with POTS and found much higher prevalence of low iron storage and mild anemia compared to the background rate in the U.S. pediatric population. Of course, having low iron can mean low energy, low delivery of oxygen, and so it's thought that this could exacerbate POTS. Now, the only thing about this study was that they defined adolescent POTS as a 30 beat per minute increase in heart rate upon tilt instead of the 40 beats per minute, which is currently used now, so who knows how that might have changed their findings. Vitamin D3 is a really common deficiency in the general population, and so this was just an N of 1 case study of a patient whose POTS basically went away when her doctor figured out that her body was not converting vitamin D3 in her supplement into the activated form. So she started taking a supplement with that activated form, and voila, she was able to go back to work and her symptoms largely went away. In this study, Dr. Blitzstein explains how thiamine deficiency is rare. It can cause POTS symptoms. So she measured thiamine levels in 65 consecutive POTS patients at the Dysautonomia Clinic, and she found 4 who were low in thiamine. They all supplemented with 100 milligrams a day, and 1 saw enormous improvements rather quickly. And so now at Dysautonomia Clinic, we're on guard for that, and I believe Dr. Blitzstein has had a few other patients improve hugely on thiamine supplements. Now, unless you have absorption issues or are an alcoholic or are like a vegan who's not eating any grains or legumes, it's theoretically hard to be deficient in thiamine. But, in POTS patients or dysautonomia patients, who knows what's going on with our absorption. Now, vitamin B6 is another nutrient that has no studies in the dysautonomia world, but anecdotally, I keep hearing physicians comment, why do my POTS patients always have weirdly high B6 even when they don't take supplements? So I just thought that was interesting. B6 is associated with neuropathy when it's either too low or too high. So anyway, just a point of interest. Energy drinks and energy bars sometimes have quite a bit of added B6, so maybe that's where people are getting it. But you would want to avoid being too high or too low. Now, this study found lower vitamin B12 levels in POTS patients. However, the authors are from Turkey, and they defined POTS as fainting on a tilt table test. So really what they found is that fainters had lower B12. And we don't really know how relevant that is to POTS, but the thinking is that it cannot hurt to check B12 levels because, again, with vitamin B12, it can be associated with neuropathy if it gets too high or too low. So to summarize, when it comes to the nutrients, I think that the thinking is you don't want to exacerbate POTS by also having a nutrient deficiency on top of it. When it comes to the POTS nutrition summary, The advice is to increase salt and fluids gradually, to try smaller, lower carbohydrate meals, to test your individual reactions to things like gluten, dairy, caffeine, alcohol, and other things in foods, and then to be vigilant to avoid nutrient imbalances. So to get kind of specific, here are a few foods that check all those boxes. I know that everyone is so different in what foods they can tolerate, what they like, what they can stand up long enough to prepare. But these are just a few ideas of things that are relatively quick to cook, to clean up. I realize that people with gastroparesis or difficulty chewing or swallowing won't be able to do these things, and they'll need foods that are more liquid or at least less fibrous. But just as some examples, sandwiches, wraps can work out. I'm a big fan of veggies and hummus because I know a lot of POTS patients kind of live on either crackers or pretzels because they need something that they can just grab so quickly. And if someone's finding that they're kind of living on pretzels day in, day out, I would encourage them to see if they could maybe at least upgrade to like veggies and hummus. I really like it. You know, veggies obviously are wonderful. And then hummus is garbanzo beans and olive oil. It might have some other veggies in there like garlic or roasted red pepper. It's got some tahini. So it actually is kind of sort of a good full meal if you just cannot stand around to make anything else. This next picture is guacamole, which is also kind of a nice healthy dip if you can't do anything more than just grab some veggies and a dip. Edamame is quick. You just boil it for 5 minutes. You can get it frozen, and now you've got a nice low-carb meal. I know my dog loves sharing edamame with me. Celery with cottage cheese on it is a nice low-carb, quick, easy meal. That could also be almond butter or peanut butter or cream cheese. Yogurt, a yogurt sundae, especially if it's Greek yogurt, is super low carb. The picture of stir fry, I know that looks like a lot of work to make that, but I was thinking of the frozen kinds. There's so many wonderful different varieties of frozen stir fry nowadays where you can just throw it in a skillet with a little bit of water, oil, walk away, and in 5-10 minutes, you've got a really, really healthy meal. You could use the sauce of your choice, have a different dinner every night by picking, peanut sauce one night, soy sauce another night. And I know that some people are probably sensitive to all kinds of these sauces or whatnot, but hopefully you could find something that works for you. Avocado toast, perennial favorite, low carb. Nuts and seeds, obviously super easy, super low carb, associated with longevity. Apples and nut butter, just some ideas. And I know that these things are all kind of high fiber, which doesn't work for everyone. I'm mentioning those because of what we're learning about the gut microbiome and how all that fiber really does promote healthy, happy, friendly gut microbes. Now, for people who have gastroparesis or difficulty chewing, or they need something that's pureed or already liquefied, these are just some of the convenience foods out there that tend to be more popular, at least that I'm hearing about. Obviously, homemade foods are the all-time best, but when that's not realistic, things like pre-made soups, things like the plant milks can be calories in your drinks without too much sugar. And then baby food. For people who cannot stomach solid food for whatever reason, maybe they cannot chew, maybe they have trigeminal neuralgia or TMJ, or they have to worry about swallowing and choking, or they just have gastroparesis so bad that they really need pureed foods. Baby food, I know, can be a really difficult mental hurdle for adults, but boy, is it ever convenient if you need small, handy, pureed meals. You can find all types of fruits, veggies, proteins. You can find different kinds to meet whatever your dietary needs are. So I would encourage you to try to be a little bit open-minded if that really helps you. But what about dysautonomia patients who don't have POTS or who have already tried these things and they're wondering, okay, what next? What other strategies should you try nutritionally? And, one option is just to kind of get back to the nutrition basics in the event that you have not already thought about those. The good news about the incredibly unhealthy, normal, standard Western diet that most of us are used to is that it leaves a lot of room for improvement, right? So almost everybody feels much better when they eat less of a standard American diet, less processed food and more real whole foods. Getting adequate nutrients, not too much sugar, when the blood sugar stabilizes, when they feed their friendly gut microbes, maybe starve the unfriendly gut microbes. These things are shown to improve sleep and mood and pain and to reduce inflammation. And so it kind of is maybe just as a sanity check, go back and see if any of these basics could be improved upon. But I realize that many patients have already addressed these basics. They're already doing all of it. So what next can they do? And one thought is to kind of come back to this fictitious patient with, POTS or dysautonomia, lots of different symptoms, and then several different comorbidities at the same time. And it's beyond the scope of this short 30-minute talk, but the good news is that PubMed has 1,200 studies on nutrition just for pain. It has over 100 different studies on just nutrition for exercise intolerance. It has thousands on nutrition just for mood or sleep or mental health. Hundreds on nutrition for small fiber neuropathy, and on and on and on. Experts in IBS and SIBO and MCAS and gastroparesis, they have all published recommendations to manage those particular things with nutrition. So you can bounce around and you can do kind of, go down the rabbit hole of, okay, well, if I have MCAS, what are the nutritional things I can do for that? If I have fatigue, what are the proven nutritional things for that? If I have small fiber neuropathy, and you'll find that there's actually a decent amount of really well done research in each of those areas. I would say better, bigger research than what we've got in the dysautonomia world. And I wish I had more time to share some really exciting studies and findings on all of these things, but just to kind of quickly show examples of what's out there. This is a review article talking about how vitamin C reduces pain in all sorts of different conditions. Everything from post-surgery to joint pain to chronic regional pain syndrome and more. And it just talks about how robust and repeatable this finding is and how vitamin C is really quite safe. You can get it from food or supplements. And so, it's healthy anyways, so it might be kind of a no-brainer for somebody who's experiencing lots of pain. This is an absolutely mind-blowing excerpt from a review of nutrition for mental health. And I don't have time to read the whole thing, but let me paraphrase. It basically says there is now good evidence that higher fruit and vegetable intake is related to better mental health. This dose is causal, dose-dependent, and robust when controlling for covariates such as demographics, physical health, financial status, and such. People who eat more fruits and veggies have lower incidence of mental disorders, including lower rates of depression, perceived stress, and negative mood. They have higher likelihood of optimal mental states, such as greater happiness, positive mood, life satisfaction, and all these kind of things that they've invented, like socio-emotional flourishing. And the effect size of going from a low intake to a high intake of fruits and vegetables is comparable to the improvement in mental health that is seen in people when they go from being unemployed to employed. So that's a big deal, right? And that's really fascinating. And I get it that lots of people with dysautonomia have lots of reasons why it's very difficult for them to eat lots of fruits or vegetables. The chewing, the digesting, the fiber. But to the extent that you can, or to the extent that you can find solutions to overcome some of these hurdles, it might be worth thinking about that. I think that everything we're learning lately is suggesting that brain inflammation and gut microbiome health have a lot to do with mental health, and that eating fruits and veggies can really help those things. But of course, right, no surprise, fruits and veggies are always obviously healthy. But what about something more exciting? What about something more decadent? This study found that dark chocolate improved chronic fatigue. It was a really good study. They gave people either a real dark chocolate bar or a placebo chocolate bar. It was actually white chocolate dyed brown by the Nestle people. They gave them one or the other for a few weeks, and then they swapped and gave them the other one for a few weeks, and then they swapped back. And they had people keep journals about their energy and their quality of life. And what they learned was that it was very reliable that the real actual high cocoa dark chocolate gave people some relief from their chronic fatigue. Now, if you don't want to do the sugar, you could do cocoa nibs or cocoa powder that is unsweetened, and that theoretically might be even better. And then a whole bunch of studies keep finding the same thing, that nitrates in vegetables, such as beets or arugula or other greens, reliably improves exercise tolerance by around 15%. In other words, when they get people on a cycle or doing some kind of exercise, either having had some of these vegetable nitrates for 5 days or not, all of a sudden they could do 15% more exercise without even realizing they were doing it. It just felt easier, and they were actually consuming less oxygen to do that amount of exercise. It also improved their cognitive function. So that's just eating some veggies that are healthy anyways, right? So all of these are examples that are just meant to show that there are some relatively easy, inexpensive, not too risky things that you could try. And the literature is just absolutely full of them. So if you're working with a dietitian or a doctor or someone who knows the nutrition literature, I think there's a lot of reason to be, kind of optimistic that you could find something somewhere. And then finally, just along the same lines of thinking that we don't always have to look to the nutrition literature that was done on dysautonomia patients, this is a nice study that talks about some supplements and dietary things that can be done to help, especially with hypermobile EDS in the context of dysautonomia. And it's not research that was done on dysautonomia patients, but it's done on enough other populations that it seems pretty promising that it might apply to us as well. Okay, so I'm out of time, but I hope that was helpful. I think the takeaway is just that each patient is really unique, possibly very complex, but that with some trial and error and maybe a good food and symptom journal, ideally the assistance of a good doctor or other practitioner, I think there is reason to be optimistic that you could find something nutritionally that would help you feel better somehow, at least sometimes. I have a website at nutritionwithjill.com where I link to all of these studies, and whenever a new one comes out, I put it there for everyone to see. I also collect any other good lectures, articles, resources about these things. The Potscast is where I try to go into some deeper dives. We've had on experts on vitamin D, on some other nutrients and some other dietary things. So that might be another good resource to check out. But I hope this was helpful. Thank you for listening, and best wishes.